Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of How Did We Not Know That? I'm Nat,
I'm Jack.
and today, Jack is going to be talking about a part of history that I don't know about.
It is the Gilded Age.
Yeah,
But before we start, I have some announcements. So, firstly, follow us on social media at HDWNKT. Please subscribe to us on YouTube, give us a like on Facebook, and then if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, give us a rating and let us know what you think of it. We'd really appreciate that.
yeah, give a comment. They would help us a lot. We love reading.
Yeah, just let us know how we're doing. Let us know how you're doing. We would really just like some interaction. It like, makes our day. Also, as always, please check out our Patreon at How Did We Not Know That? And we want to give a shout out to our most recent Patreon, Caroline from California. Thank you so much for becoming a history hero. And let us know if you have a topic you want us to cover, because we will do that.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. You're great.
And then also the biggest announcements we have for, I guess, today are we have recently started a monthly newsletter. So at the end of each month, we'll just send out a quick email telling you what episodes we released that month. And you can go to our website at hdwnkt.com to sign up for it. It's under the contact page.
Yeah, we have a lot of big updates coming to this show soon. So if you sign up for monthly newsletters, you get the inside scoop on everything behind the scenes and all of our upcoming plans and things. So
Yes,
sure
exactly.
to subscribe to that.
For sure. And then we can just see who's listening, which would be nice sometimes.
Like, are you guys there?
Yeah, please. Hello. Anyways, okay, the Gilded Age.
Yeah.
So let me know, Nat, first off, do you know what gilded means?
Gilded, isn't that like, oh my gosh, I'm about to sound real stupid, but does it have to do with like metal and like gilded? I think of like gold and metal stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, gilded. Well, yeah, so gilded actually means it's like metal, like tin, a cheap metal, and then it's thinly covered with gold paint. Um, and then gilded also means wealthy or privileged. And the
Ooh.
term Gilded Age was coined by Mark Twain and Charles Dudley Warner in their 1873 book, The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today. And that book was a criticism on basically social inequality during that time in America. And it was to draw a contrast between the golden age, where the golden age is everyone's doing well, everyone's thriving, and it's a golden era. But gilded is kind of a sarcastic comment on what's happening, because it seems like everything's great because we have these mega millionaire billionaires emerging, but everyone else is suffering, so it just looks like it's golden. It's actually just gilded.
That's tea. That's major tea.
Yeah. So yeah, basically America seems great, but it literally sucked for basically everyone who wasn't thriving. And this is the time period in America of the mega wealthy, who are known as barons. So that's Rockefeller, that's Carnegie, Vanderbilt, JP Morgan. And this is a time where there's huge monopolies in very, very expensive industries like oil and steel and the railroads and also finances. So why did this age start? So the Gilded Age started after the Civil War in 1865 and it ended around 1898. And you know why it might have ended?
The Spanish American War.
Yeah, it did.
Yes. Oh my gosh. You guys, we talk about, I feel like we keep bringing up Spanish American War. Well, we're going to do an episode about it, but yeah.
Yeah, we drop it every single episode. We're saying we will do the Spanish American War. But yes, it ends around 1898 with the Spanish American War. So the reason the Gilded Age started was because we had a second industrial revolution. So do you remember what the first industrial revolution was like?
Yeah, wasn't that with the invention of, like, the cotton gin? Right? And it was, like, during the slavery era, so, like, slave.
Yeah. Wait, what's a cotton gin?
Oh, isn't that, like, they process like, you can process cotton easily to, like, turn it into fabric?
Yeah, it's like a textile mills, basically.
Wait, didn't the first industrial revolution start in England and, like, the Great Britain, and then, like, it made its way over to the US?
Yeah, it bleeds into the US anyways, because we're doing trade with Britain. So any first industrial revolution is gonna we're gonna adapt that anyways.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it's like textile mills,
Yeah.
and canal boats and like the steam engine.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so then the second industrial revolution is mainly this new process to create steel, and steel isn't like a new technology. They already made steel. It was just there was a new process called the Bessemer steel process, and that was a way that you blew out like toxins within the iron to create steel, and that would make it high quality. Well, it produced higher quality steel that was faster and cheaper.
Okay.
Yeah, and then also there's like the assembly line with Henry Ford, so that made cars really cheap. So
Uh,
much so that even his workers could afford to buy them, which just helped his company because then you're selling more cars.
yeah. Wow, okay, yeah. Now this is all coming back to me. It's like
Mhm.
5th grade
I
history.
didn't even remember the first one. I was like, oh yeah, canal boats.
Uh,
That's a thing. But okay, so then around this time too, with all of this like technology emerging and the industrialization, we also see an urbanization effect. And so urbanization is basically the process of moving to cities from outside. So during this time, before the Gilded Age, most people were living in rural areas and farms. And by the late 1800s, the United States industrial output and GDP, which is your gross domestic product, was growing faster than that of any other country in the world.
wow.
Yeah. And so by 1890, 28% of Americans lived in urban areas. And by 1920, more Americans lived in towns and cities than in rural areas. And this was all because of like a technological advancement stage, which not only pushed more people from rural areas into the cities to find work, but also it attracted more immigrants from other countries, mostly Europe, to pursue a better life because the country's growing so fast. It was like the American dream kind of starts to
Yeah.
form where you can build a better life for yourself.
Wow.
So there ended up being about 11 million Americans, so like American born people who migrated from the countryside to cities between 1870 and 1920. And then an additional 25 million immigrants, mostly again from Europe, who had moved to the United States.
Wow, that's a lot.
And another thing too for like immigrants not moving is mostly because when you move to a new country, you kind of have to stay with your support system. So you really can't afford to move that far out of where you're first arriving. And one of the big ports is going to be like Ellis Island in New York. Okay, so with all of these new jobs, the big question is who are the laborers and how did they get treated?
Mm.
So, with all of these big fortunes that are getting built during this time, they were built off of the backs of immigrants. Um, and one of the biggest examples of that is the, the Transcontinental Railroad. And we're gonna do a whole nother episode in depth on this because it's like a very chunky piece of history in the United States that they often do not cover. But the
Mhm.
plan for the Transcontinental Railroad was to connect the entire USA by railroad. And so over 40,000 miles of steel were laid down to create the tracks. And to put that into perspective, coast to coast, if you were going to drive from California to New York or like West Coast to East Coast, that's only about 3,000 miles. And so to lay down 40,000 miles of steel, they're really connecting all of the United States as much as they possibly can.
I can't imagine.
I know. It's so much work.
Yeah.
And because of the railroad, they were able to greatly improve our ability to transport goods across the country, which helps us being self-sufficient as well, which will just increase our like GDP because we can ship things out and we don't have to depend so heavily on trade.
Yeah, that's huge.
Hmm. And the railroad was built by 90% Chinese immigrants. So that's like, of the workers, 90% of them are Chinese. They're not like, I'm a 90% Chinese person. Just to like clarify, when I said that, I was like, is that clear to everyone? Anyways, and then like the last 10% were Irish immigrants, which we can go into more, but Irish immigrants were actually seen as non-whites, and they were treated probably the worst out of, potentially the worst. I don't want to say that like for sure, but they were treated potentially the worst out of like the white class. They weren't treated very well. It was built by like mostly Chinese immigrants, and the Chinese immigrants were always paid less than their white counterparts, which were usually Irish immigrants.
Ay, ay, ay.
I know. And they would like go on strike a lot to protest the injustice, and they never did get to the same fair, like they never got to equal wages.
Wow.
Yeah. So the railroad finished in May of 1869, and this was a project of Leland Stanford, who is the founder of Stanford University, and he got extremely wealthy from the railroad and the work of Chinese immigrants. And it's just ironic because Leland Stanford was the governor of California, and his campaign was made on the basis of being anti-Chinese. So basically, he advocated against giving Chinese people rights, and he abused them during their time working on the railroads, and then he became like disgustingly rich because of them.
That's
So
so upsetting.
it's
That's
it's
just, I had no idea.
yeah, it's pretty sad. And like fun fact, I'm half Chinese, and like this didn't affect my ancestors so much as like they didn't work on the railroad, but the next thing did. So in 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act was put into place. So the railroad gets finished in 1869. You have this huge group of immigrants who just worked so hard to build it, and now what they've built has extremely benefited the country beyond our greatest like imagination. It's connecting us, it's increasing like our output. And then they decided to ban all Chinese immigrants, like a complete ban, no immigration from China at all. So that did affect my family because my family was not able to come to the US and they immigrated to Malaysia instead.
Wow.
So the Chinese Exclusion Act not only bans Chinese immigrants, but it also denies the ones who were already there, who built the railroad. It denied them citizenship, and it also segregated them from the rest of society.
That's awful.
Yeah.
So disgusting. Like, oh, thanks for your cheap labor and like thanks for like working extremely hard over this railroad and like now get out. Like
Yeah.
that's so upsetting.
It's horrific, but it's a reoccurring theme in American history. Okay, so yeah, the Exclusion Act was not fully lifted until the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. So if you're wondering why there aren't a ton of Chinese immigrants where you're from, could be it.
Wow, that's such a long period of time.
Yeah, literally. They started to lift it in 1943, but it was a quota of only 105 max Chinese immigrants could be taken in per year. And so it was like a very, very, very tiny amount would be let in. And then 1965, they finally got rid of it.
That's like really recently. I did not realize it took that long
Yeah.
to be repealed. Holy moly.
Wild. So, so those workers worked 6 days a week and they made $26 a month, which is a little over $1 a day. And that's about $31 today. So roughly only $3 an hour in today's money.
Oh
And that's being conservative with me considering I'm saying that they worked only 10 hours a day, and that's a conservative estimate.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. And that's like hard labor. Jeez.
Yeah, a lot of them died. You would get paid $1 extra if you did the tunneling work, which is the most dangerous part. That's where a lot of people would die because the tunnels would cave in on them.
Oh my God, that's so scary. Oh,
Hmm.
that's awful.
But that extra dollar though,
Yeah, but like if you're getting paid so little, like $1, like that's a third of your.
it's ridiculous. And the wage gap was about $9 between Chinese and Irish workers.
Oh man.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's just the biggest example I wanted to put into there. There are bad working conditions basically all around for immigrants, but that is one of the biggest ones. And overall, yeah, bad working conditions in the cities for immigrants. They all lived in very tiny rooms with sometimes 10 of them crammed in together with basically no light. There's no light in these tiny rooms. And all of the fortunes that we're going to talk about were built on the backs and labor of immigrants. There are lots of preventable deaths. There are very long work days, bad working conditions, and a book that I think I'm going to read. We were supposed to read this in high school, but I did not read it because I
Mhm.
wasn't a reader in high school. But if you're interested, you can read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. It's a 1906 novel that illustrates the harsh working conditions in Chicago, specifically the meat industry, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, did you read it?
No, because like I was so scared. I was like a vegetarian for so long, and I was like, I'm scared to read about meat packing. But like, I think it's a really important book. I should read it.
This leads to the question, how bad was the wealth gap in the Gilded Age? So there's a very sharp contrast to the poor immigrant workers that we just talked about. And so on the complete other end of the spectrum are what are known as barons. They're also called robber barons, just because basically like the amount of wealth they had was criminal. Um, and they really exploited the flaws of capitalism to the worst extent, which also, in case anyone doesn't know, Nat, do you want to define capitalism?
Capitalism, the definition of capitalism, it's like, yeah, market determined. It's a free market, so the government like doesn't get involved with the market economy, and they leave it up to like consumers and companies. And
Yeah. And like competition is good in capitalism. So basically everyone gets to compete and everyone can own, like entrepreneurship is stuff. I don't have a textbook definition for capitalism, but anyways, so they made their wealth through the monopolization, monop, monop,
but
monopolization of huge industries like oil, steel, railroads, and financing. JP Morgan
mm,
dominated corporate finance on Wall Street. And okay, this stat is literally wild, but they were, as calculated, making $10 a minute in their time. So $10 a minute back in the late 1800s, and that's about $310 a minute in today's terms, which is approximately $18,600 an hour, which is way more than I make. I don't know about you, Nat, if you're like a secret wealthy person.
I wish.
I was like, what? You could not. And maybe, okay, there's a big range too, because Rockefeller is by far the wealthiest out of all the barons we're going to talk about. He's like, I will tell you how much he makes in a bit, but he's way wealthier. And so this estimate is more like an average between all of the barons, but that's insane. Like $18,600 an hour.
Do you know how much Bezos makes? Is it like similar to that?
Bezos Hun. Okay, I'm just gonna go right into the next stat. Rockefeller's wealth and okay, John D. Rockefeller, for anyone who doesn't know, he was the founder of the Standard Oil Company, which was the monopoly. And then I should define monopoly. Monopoly is basically, if you ever played the game Monopoly, the goal of that is to make sure that you buy up as much property so that anytime someone lands, they're always paying you money, I guess. And so in the real world, a monopoly is where you hold so many companies or control of so much of an industry that people have no choice but to come to you. And when that happens, it's really bad, because then without competition, there's no limitation on how you can price your products. So with the Standard Oil Company, since Rockefeller held a monopoly on all oil companies, if you need oil, which basically every industry does, you
Yeah.
have no choice but to get oil from Rockefeller. And since no one else is competing with Rockefeller, he can just price oil as high as he wants to price it. So he made a ton of money, and at his peak, he was worth about 318.3 billion in today's money.
Whoa.
But that's ridiculous. And to put that into perspective, the richest man in the world right now, Jeff Bezos, is currently only at a measly 189 billion, his pocket change for a Rockefeller. Like, I don't think mentally, can you comprehend $1 billion? Can you okay, just think about 1,000,000, and that's like 100 times that is 1 billion. And Bezos has 100 of those plus 89 more of those, and then Rockefeller has 300 plus 18 more. Like, it's an insane amount of wealth. Like, you can't even imagine how
Dude,
much money that.
there's like literally like there's a website and it's like like something like can you spend Bill Gates money, because Bill Gates also has a lot of money, not as much as Jeff Bezos or Rockefeller, but a lot. And like literally it's like you could like buy like a cup of coffee and like you could see like your total net worth and like one cup of coffee like this is nothing. And it's just funny to see like how much stuff you could buy, because I cannot like mentally comprehend that much money. Like, oh my gosh, I could pay off my loans. Like, I could.
Your loans are pocket change. It's a penny to them. It's nothing.
Oh my God. Okay, Jeff Bezos.
Ridiculous.
If
Like,
you're,
you think about even like, what is it, the Kardashians? They were like, they're so wealthy and famous and everything. Bruh, like, they don't even have $1 billion. Like, it's nothing.
if there are any billionaires listening, please consider donating to our
Please become a history hero and sponsor us on Patreon.
Yeah.
Right? It's only $3 a month, please.
It's like not even a penny to you.
Right.
All you
Not even, yeah.
billionaires listening.
Yeah, so wild. It's incredible wealth. And also, so another big baron during this time is Vanderbilt. So I don't really know specifically, what is it, Cornelius Vanderbilt? Let me look it up.
I don't even know. I think of Vanderbilt. I think of Serena Vanderbilt from Gossip Girl.
Oh
She
my God. Is she a Vanderbilt in that show?
Well, she's a Vanderbilt, I guess. I don't know if she's like the Vanderbilt. I would imagine because her family's like super rich.
You know who is a Vanderbilt? Anderson Cooper. Did you know that?
Oh,
Yeah, his mom's a Vanderbilt.
what the heck?
He's super wealthy. I found that out when I was researching, and I was like, Anderson Cooper? What?
So random. I mean, probably not, but like,
He's such a nice guy, too. I was like, oh my God. But honestly, the wealth has been like diluted for the generation. So they're still obviously really wealthy. Like, he inherited like 1.5 million, but it's like,
yeah, I mean, whatever. It's not like.
yeah. I'll take it if you're gonna give it to me. Anyways, so yeah, it's Cornelius Vanderbilt. So Cornelius Vanderbilt built his wealth through railroads and shipping. And something interesting is, because like, how are these people spending their money, right? So Vanderbilt built these really huge estates, and an estate is basically a big house and a lot of land, just tons of acres of it. So I actually went to one of his estates. It's called the Biltmore Estate, and that's in North Carolina, which I also just realized when I was doing this research that is only one of their estates. That's not, they have multiple estates, but this is just one. And I don't even think it's Cornelius's. It was one of his descendants who built this estate just for himself. It is, if you can go, just search Biltmore Estate and go buy some tickets and go to North Carolina and check it out. If you can go, it is literally the most greedy thing you will ever lay your eyes on. The house is huge. I just remember walking through it and I was like, why does this exist? Like who needed this much? It's I don't even like so many rooms and there's like golden, maybe gilded, maybe not golden, but like just like golden what are they called? The things like that people put like in their houses like on the corners. You don't have any. Like the things like on the bottom.
Oh, I'm too poor.
No, 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 I'm just kidding.
Just kidding. I know like what you're talking about. I don't
They're
know.
like crownings maybe or something.
Crowning. Yeah, maybe crownings.
Yeah, something like that.
I don't even know what to Google. Like, yeah.
Yeah, like an image search or something. But yeah, they had like gold everywhere, like golden accents. And they had a swimming pool in the basement and they had a bowling alley and the swimming pool's nice. Like I would use it and a whole changing room and yeah, it's just an insane amount of wealth. And keep in mind, that's like late 1800s, just that much wealth. And they're not just paying for all of that land and all like this enormous house, you're also paying for all of these servants too, who run the house and clean the house. So, yeah, hopefully
a whole city. Like you're like employing the whole town.
it literally is like that just shows you how ridiculous the amount of wealth it was in the 1800s.
Mm.
So, as you might ask, as I did, why were those people allowed to get so wealthy and why were other people so poor? Like, how did that happen? Why did no one say anything? So, during this time, there's actually something called the social Darwinism mindset.
Ooh, yeah.
So, as you may know, Charles Darwin in 1859 published this book on the theory of evolution, and this became known as Darwinism. Note, not social Darwinism. So, people twisted the concept of Darwinism and they created a field called social Darwinism. And basically, social Darwinism was used as a justification for racism, sexism, and poverty in the world. And Herbert Spencer spearheaded this philosophy saying you shouldn't help the poor because it was survival of the fittest. And by helping the poor, you're preventing weaker genes from dying out. So we're going to go into why this is wrong. Basically, in case you didn't know, in case you think that like, oh, sounds about right. Like, which I think like, okay, if I were like growing up and I like heard Darwinism, maybe if you didn't talk to me more about evolution, if I just heard about like the theory of evolution, I might come to this incorrect conclusion as well. And so we're gonna talk about why it's
Well, I feel like I just was gonna say like I feel like rich people, wealthy people at the time and today too, like kind of use this mindset to like make themselves feel better. Like, oh no, I like deserve this amount of wealth because I work hard, and like it's not just because I inherited it. Like I work harder than like people who don't have as much wealth. When like that's not true. That's not the whole picture. But yeah.
Yeah. And it's not like, not to discredit, obviously, like to build empires and entrepreneurs, you do have to work hard, but everyone's got certain benefits, especially all these barons. So the reason why social Darwinism is wrong is because a lot of people will wrongly think about evolution in terms of a linear progression. Like you see there's that one picture and it's like the ape that turns into the human. People think that it's like a linear thing. So the human is more developed than an ape. So we are by nature superior. And that's incorrect. That's not the correct way to think about evolution. I also blame, I have a note here. I also blame the Pokemon game for distorting how we think about evolving. Because even I thought about evolution incorrectly as well. Because when your Pokemon evolves, unless you press B, you don't stunt its growth. And so when it evolves, it's supposed to become this like stronger, better creature. And that's actually not how evolution works. Yeah, so evolution is not a time thing where other species are less evolved or have not been evolving for as much time. Basically, everything that you see today has been evolving for the same amount of time. Evolution is when the adaptations or traits or mutations that suit a species better for a specific environment will survive and thrive better than others without the same gene, but they're coming from the same shared ancestor. So it helps if you think of it like a tree where the branches will come out and maybe like there's more leaves on one branch than the other, but it doesn't mean that one branch is more superior because you're coming from the same branch, if that makes sense. I think that's a bad example.
Yeah, I get that.
Okay. But yeah, it's basically like there's a good beetle example, but basically like um they're like there's like a group of beetles and some beetles are green, some beetles are blue, and in their environment, and it's because there's a genetic mutation that some are blue, some are green, and in the environment there happens to be a lot of green foliage, and the birds in the environment that eat beetles are having a better time seeing the blue ones instead of the green ones. So just in that environment there happens to be more green beetle survival because they're blending in and the blue ones aren't. That doesn't mean that the blue ones are inferior to the green ones. It just means in that scenario, like in that specific environment, those traits were able to live on. That's why you see trait variation between species.
Wow. You did a good job explaining that. We should become a science podcast if history doesn't work out.
Special season, yeah. So a lot of people today even still think this way, especially with poorer countries. So, for example, with a lot of African countries, a lot of people modern day like to claim that Africans by nature are inferior or not as smart or civilized, and that these are why these countries are poor. And that completely ignores the fact that westernized countries have been stealing natural resources, including human labor, slavery,
Yeah.
for over 400 years, and they continue to do so. So social Darwinism just completely disregards the effect of colonization on different groups of people around the world. Anyways, so this also supported the idea that you shouldn't mix, as we saw with miscegenation laws, which we covered in our episode, We Were Illegal. And that's really bad. So because when you do not mix with different race, or the less you tend to mix with people who have different traits than you, then the lower your genetic variation is for your descendants. And the reason why that's bad is because you not only have a lower ability to survive, you also will have it's very common to develop a lot of health issues and rare diseases. So for example, in Amish country or the royal family, there we see a lot of I want to say this like nicely, but we see a lot of like rare genetic mutations or diseases because there's a practice of inbreeding within those communities, especially with the royal family. The consideration of being purebred or pure blood or something like that, they would tend not to mix with anyone who wasn't within the family, and as a result, you see a lot of diseases and mental disorders because of that. One of the biggest ones within the royal family was hemophilia, which is the inability of your blood to clot, and that was actually known as the royals disease because it was very common in the royal family.
Wow.
So, and to go off of that, yeah, so the lack of genetic variation. So the main reason endangered species become endangered is because of the low genetic variation in their gene pool. So the same thing with literally every living thing that you see. The lower the genetic variation, the worse off you are because you're not able to, let's say, you're not able to withstand, what is it, like natural disasters. Like you're less able to adapt to different surroundings when you only have a set amount of traits.
Mm-hmm.
So a fun fact actually is even banana fruits are, like the ones we see today, have very, very little genetic variation, and it's only a matter of time before the banana that we know gets completely wiped out. Have you heard of this?
Yeah, I feel like I've heard of this before.
Yeah, the banana we know today is like the Cavendish banana, and it's really how they made it, because our first banana that we had was the Gros Michel banana, and that one died out. So what they did is they took a Cavendish banana and then they, I believe, mutated it so that every single banana has like literally the same genetic makeup. So there's absolutely like no genetic variation between banana plants today. So as soon as we have one disease that the banana is not resistant to, it's gonna completely die out and we'll never have bananas again.
I like bananas. What the heck? Save the bananas.
It's gonna happen. Like, it's coming. Okay. So then also too, yeah, the government was not like involved basically during this time too. It's like, where is everyone in the government? Government did very little to help laborers. Yeah, politics were actually characterized by scandal and corruption during this time. J.P. Morgan, who was a wealthy baron, gave $400 million as a loan to the U.S. government. And so the government is basically a pawn to the wealthy because that's where they're getting their money from.
Yikes.
There's also something known as the patronage or spoil system, which is where the elected president is allowed to give government positions to their friends or close political supporters. So that makes for a very homogenous cabinet, like government that has only one idea. So lots of opportunity for corruption. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the final reform of this policy comes after the assassination of President James Garfield in 1881.
Oh my gosh.
Which we should cover at some point. And they, after this, they reformed civil service and ended the spoil system in 1883 with the Pendleton Act. And another big problem with the government is laissez-faire government. So laissez-faire is a key part in capitalist economics, and laissez-faire policies basically oppose government intervention in society or the market. I think laissez-faire because it comes from like a French word, right? And I think it means let it be or something.
Yeah, let it be. That sounds correct. It's like hands off, like just let it do whatever.
Yeah.
Don't touch it.
Don't do anything. So proponents of laissez-faire, so supporters of laissez-faire, were actually known as liberals, which is really interesting. And the liberals had the belief that a free market would naturally produce the best and most efficient solutions to economic and social problems. And this is extremely different from the definition of liberalism that we have today. So liberals today are like perhaps some of the polar opposites of the original definition for liberals. So today, liberals would typically advocate for government intervention to solve social problems. So libertarians are more closely equivalent to the Gilded Age liberals in US politics.
I see.
Yeah. And the combo of laissez-faire capitalism, social Darwinism, and a corrupt government was basically a recipe for some very terrible lives for basically anyone who was not a baron. And then, of course, people rose up because if they didn't, we would not be here today.
Yeah.
So between 1881 and 1900s, 35,000 workers per year lost their lives in industrial and other accidents at work.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow,
So because of yeah, because it's not even like I know our population is a lot bigger now, but during this time period, it at most would be like 35 million, maybe like 40 million at most.
Yeah, I don't even know.
So people started going on strike literally all the time. There are no fewer than 100,000 workers who were on strike each year. And in 1892, about 1,200 strikes involving roughly 164,000 workers took place across the nation.
Wow. That's a lot.
Yeah. Well, it shows too that like people have always been and will always fight against injustice. And it's because of the efforts of those people, that change was made because the government was not doing jack squat for them. So another thing that happened in addition to strikes is that labor unions started to form. So labor unions worked to limit the influence of big businesses and gain rights for all laborers. And they would come together in larger numbers to strike and protest unfair labor wages and conditions. An example of this was the Knights of Labor, which was founded in 1869. They unfortunately collapsed in like the 1886 Haymarket Square riot in Chicago. Do you know about this?
Yeah, I like didn't know about it until I was researching topics to talk about. But yeah, it was like a riot because of labor rights.
Yeah, they wanted like an 8-hour workday.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was like a bomb at some point, and then police shot into the protesters. Mm-hmm.
Also, I don't know if you like read about like saw this in your research about Knights of Labor, but I was also like looking into covering them. I remember reading that like Knights of Labor, like they were a really strong union, but they supported the Chinese Exclusion Act because it would be Chinese immigrants would be competition for them. So like that's just like something to consider too, is like a lot of these labor unions, it was like, yeah, we want not all of them, but like the general trend is like, yeah, we want like fair wages and like safe working standards, but like we're only including like we're only representing white Americans and like we're only fighting for white Americans. So again, like Americans or people of color working in America are like left out of the picture or are like trying to be excluded. Yeah. So
yeah, no, thank you for adding that. It's literally like such a common theme that color does affect the way you get treated.
yep.
Anyways, and so yeah, the Knights of Labor eventually got disbanded after that. And by 1886, the American Federation of Labor was formed and it was growing. And there was also the People's Populist Party. And this was a political party that arose in 1890 to champion the interests of farmers. And that party rallied with the labor movement, but they eventually just folded into the Democratic Party in 1896, and they ended up disbanding in 1908. And then this is important because this is on our test, like the term. So muckrakers, you know what this is?
I remember it from high school, but I don't remember what it means.
Yeah, it literally it was like one of the questions on the test, and I was like, okay, it's actually very important. So a muckraker is a reform-minded journalist who formed in the progressive era. So not necessarily the Gilded Age, but there's a bit of overlap. The progressive era is from the 1890s to the 1920s, which is basically we made a lot of progress in human rights and civil rights, overlapping with the Gilded Age. So muckrakers basically exposed established institutions and leaders as corrupt, and they worked with, the work was usually published in magazines. Okay, so to close, how did things change and how did it end? So we eventually hit an economic depression in 1893 known as the Panic of 1893. Millions of people were unemployed, homeless, and hungry. Unemployment reaches about 50%, and
50%?
yeah, it's pretty bad.
Wait, that's like literally insane.
Yeah, well, there was a depression. So I'm like so desensitized to like stats nowadays. I'm like, yeah, that's rough. And because of that, this leads to lots of anger from the low and middle class with political corruption and social inequality. Started the progressive movement, so then the progressive movement starts, and that was because of President Teddy Roosevelt, who took office in 1901 after the assassination of McKinley. Yeah.
I'm so excited, but
literally check out our President McKinley was assassinated episode.
Yeah. Go back to our first episode.
we've come so far. And yeah, Roosevelt supported corporate America, but he believed federal checks and control should be in place to limit excessive corporate greed off the backs of immigrants and the lower class. So, with the work of the government and muckrakers, so the people, the progressive era was able to usher in a lot of reform that helped shift away power from robber barons, such as trust busting with the Sherman antitrust laws. So that's just basically outlawing monopolies. Like, you cannot own every single thing in an industry. You have to have competition between the industries and within industry. And there's also labor reform, so 8-hour workday, no child labor, child labor laws.
Wow.
Women's suffrage, birth control, trade unions, food and medicine regulations. Yeah, lots of stuff. Fair labor standards.
That's a lot of reform. Like, if you can, like, can you imagine, like, I don't know if you're like born in like the late 1800s and then you live till like the mid 1900s, and then like you see how much the working force has changed and like working standards has changed. Like, that's a lot that happened.
Yeah. Yeah. It shows just like how much growth like each generation had to do. And I think it didn't occur to me till I was doing this that these are real people. I think with history, I like at least will tend to think that these people didn't exist and that this stuff is like so long ago, and like these I'm just looking at like history and it's like fictional to me, but like it's a real problem that people really had. And I think it was really weird for me to look at images of people during this time because I don't know what I was expecting them to look like, but they look like us. Like, we literally look the same, and I was like, there's no indication that they're old or anything. And just because like your grandma is really old doesn't mean that she wasn't your age at once and there weren't problems during that time.
That's so true. It really is, like, especially just reading from a really boring old textbook. Like, it's so hard to empathize,
Empathize. Yeah.
empathize. It's so hard to empathize with people because, like, if you don't hear about individual stories, or like if you're just getting like numbers and like facts and the statistics, it's hard to really think about, like, put yourself in their shoes and like think about what life was like at that time and how much people struggled. And yeah, it's weird to like think of people in like the 1800s like normal people. Like, it does sound like silly to say, but I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's literally so true. Okay, so to close us out, by 1916, America's cities were cleaner and healthier, factories were safer, governments less corrupt, and many people had better housing, working hours, and wages. So there are fewer monopolies, which meant that more people could pursue the American dream and start their own businesses. Just before we hit World War I, the Spanish flu, and the Roaring '20s. So most of the robber barons and their families, however, remained wealthy for generations, of course. And progressives still continued their mission to close the gap between the wealthy and poor and champion the needy and disenfranchised.
Wow.
That's
Wow.
the Gilded Age.
Amazing job, Jack.
Okay, next week is our last episode for season 1. And if you didn't notice, season 1 has basically only been US history. So season 2 is going to be world history. Yeah, we're really excited for that. So stay tuned. We're also going to have a break in between seasons. So after next week, we will take a 2-week break and then we'll come back at it.
Yeah.
Excited because we're going to cover topics from other countries, and we see a lot of our viewers from different countries, so please leave us a rating, tell us where you're from, tell us what about your country, what you want us to cover, and
tweet us.
Tweet us, yes, please.
Email us, follow us on Instagram.
Anything. Send us an owl, do something, anything.
there's so many ways to get in touch with us, and we're just so excited to hear from you. All right.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, guys. Bye.